Sonny Melendrez, Sonny Radio, sonnyradio.com.
Hello, it's Sonny Melendrez, and welcome to the positive side of the radio spectrum. You found it. This is the Sonny Melendrez Show, and every week we strive to bring you entertainment and inspiration through storytelling, fascinating guests, exclusive celebrity interviews, and it's all delivered with lots of enthusiasm. Can't wait for you to meet my special guest today, the voice artistry of Steve O'Brien. And now, on with the show.
Sonny Radio, sonnyradio.com.
Steve O'Brien is a professional voiceover artist whose work has been heard on countless national commercials, narrations, audiobooks, station imaging, and more. He's the host of the Voiceover Hustle podcast, and his introduction to working behind the microphone came from his many years spent in radio. In fact, it was during that time that he began doing freelance voice work. Over time, Steve's voiceover business grew to a point that he could no longer continue in radio. He said goodbye with a full heart to the industry that gave him his start as a storyteller, and he's never looked back. Here's a sample of Steve O'Brien's voiceover magic.
Possible is just a word. It doesn't define us. We define it by giving our best. At Teachers Credit Union, we call that doing your possible. Bring on the frozen tundra, the seared pavement, the cratered concrete. Come on, road, do your worst. Bridgestone Tires says, bring it. We're about more than health care. We believe in whole care. You're more than a set of symptoms, a chart, or a procedure. Are you wearing pants right now? Does it matter? Definitely not if you're stuck at home or if you're on your way to a Take 5 oil change. Your incredible laziness will remain your little secret.
What a voice. What a guy. Steve O'Brien, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be on the show.
A real pleasure to be on your show. And I can't tell you how many wonderful comments I got from people, especially in the industry, in voiceovers and in radio, being very appreciative of our conversation.
You were a big hit on the Voiceover Hustle, no doubt about it. You sounded great. So thank you for all the good information.
Thank you. Did you have an idea that you wanted to be in radio? I mean, what was your voice like as a kid?
It was just like this. I was born. Actually, I was almost kind of like a lyric tenor. I had a very high voice as a little child, as many of us do. My dad was a pastor, and he used to, this goes back, tells you how old I am. They used to sign off radio and television stations every night. And when they did that, they had devotions. And my father would go and record devotions at different radio and television stations.
Really?
And he would take me and my brother along with him. And I was just enamored with all the equipment and the people and the personalities walking around the radio and television stations in the huge metropolis of Fort Wayne, Indiana. They were my heroes because I saw them on TV. And so that's, I think, where my love of radio really came about. And then fast forward to my brother was going to check out of college. And, being, an impertinent 17-year-old, I had said to my parents, yeah, I'm going to go do my own thing. You guys do whatever you want on the Blue Ribbon Tour, but I'm going to go, check out the college campus myself. So I went right to the broadcast department. And I walked in, and a guy named Max Seed said to me, are you here for a tour? Because we just finished. I'm like, no, that's okay. He goes, no, let me show you around. So he showed me around the radio and television departments, and it was he spent a lot of time, answered all my questions. So I went back to the hotel that night and I said, hey, I know what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And my parents were like, yeah, sure you do, but it was my career for over 32 years. So
that's incredible. Now, Did you have an idea of or a goal of where you wanted to work or who you wanted to be like?
The way I got into radio instead of television, because I really loved television, was that I lost my audition tape. After I went to college, you produce your demos and you
Right.
go out and try to find work off of those. And I went to TV station in Fort Wayne, 21 Alive. And all I had to do is present a demo. And I lost it somehow when I moved from college to home. And the guy's like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever seen. You could have had a job today if you'd just handed me a tape, but you didn't. He goes, even if it was blank, I might not have known the difference.
Huh.
So that's how I didn't get into TV. And so I turned to radio, and the rest is history.
And your first radio job was doing what?
Well, actually, it was in the big college town of Vincennes. I worked at WRTB, hit 96. And after that, I moved to South Bend and worked up at WZZP. And I think my first full-time job was actually in WLKI, Angola, Indiana. So I started big, and it's been downhill since
back
then.
then, if you were in a big town already or a big city, you had to start at another city. You had to go back to a little place.
Yeah.
And so that's why you're climbing the ladder. Nowadays, it's not unusual to be able to at least break into radio if you live in one of those big cities. Did you have somebody or a mentor, somebody who really kind of guided you in those early days?
I didn't until later in my career. And I think I really missed out on that in, say, the first 8 to 10 years. But there were people along the way that I think, in college that guided me. But I wish I'd have had somebody early on that really took an interest in me. But as you mentioned, there was just so many people in radio back then. Mm-hmm. And, radio stations were big staffs. We had, I worked on a CHR Top 40, and
That's
we had
contemporary hit radio for anyone.
Yeah, but we had 2 full-time news people on there. Plus, we were live around the clock. So it was an air staff of like 15, for one station.
Yeah, sure.
You never see that anymore. You don't have 15 in a cluster of 4 or 5 stations.
And if you're listening at midnight, somebody's there. It was a live personality.
Yeah. So no, I didn't have anybody that I think really mentored me until I'd been in South Bend at a couple of different stations. And there was a guy that I work with that promoted me to assistant PD. And he really was a mentor in a lot of ways. And from then on, my career took off as far as, working in radio and management, whether program director, ops director, things like that. And I loved it, What was it that literally got you on the map? I guess when I got my first programming job, I felt, really for the first time, a sense of security. And, we had some good success. And I didn't stay at that station long. I think I was there 2 years. I was in Valparaiso. It was my first programmer's job. And then I got lots of really nice offers at bigger stations. And I ended up moving to Madison, Wisconsin. Great cluster up there, Midwest family of stations, and really good broadcasters, just top notch. And that was probably what really just, I think, propelled me.
We kind of have similar backgrounds in that we were both program directors. And a lot of times the program director is also on the air, and sometimes they're not. Were you also on the air?
Yeah, I was always kind of, I always tried to negotiate that out so I didn't have to do an air shift. And every time I would go there, they're like, oh, no, we want you on the air.
Yeah.
And so I would do the PD shift, which is like 1 to 3.
Right.
And so they always required that. And if we had openings, they're like, well, you could do afternoons or you can do mornings. And I'm like, I got enough on my plate.
Yeah, yeah. Well, also, if I was a PD or if I was an ops manager and I was wanting to hire you and I heard your voice, there's no way I wouldn't have you involved in some way because you have such a wonderful gift.
There was an air staff that I worked with one time, and I remember we had a meeting. I was talking about like content and how to do interviews and, looking at it from a different perspective and all this. And I hadn't been on the air. I was just talking about some things, general things. And they're all like, yeah, whatever, well, you've been there.
Yeah.
And so I did an air shift and was doing an interview with someone. And usually I like to record them ahead of time, cut them up, put on there. And I go, I'll just have to do this one live. He's in for a short time. I think it was Steve Warner, who was a country star. And so we chatted on the air, and afterwards they go, okay, that's how you want interviews done. I'm like, that's how I want interviews done. They're like, okay, we get it. So
that's wonderful. Tell me the difference between now and back then, as far as getting into radio. What advice would you give somebody who's, wide-eyed and bushy-tailed and literally has that awe of the industry, maybe just as a listener? How would they start?
Well, I would start by saying one thing. It used to be that the major markets, large markets, were where the best radio was done. I don't think that's necessarily true anymore. It used to be that radio stations were very locally focused. Now their run is a network, in that they have one morning show that does all their top 40 stations, one that does all their rock stations, and they propagate that throughout the country. And so you've kind of lost that local feel to it. But I think we've lost personality radio on a local level. But if you go to smaller markets, smaller media markets, they still do a lot of that. And so those are great places to start and learn how to become a personality. And as you know, becoming a personality is not just, oh, I've got a big personality, I'm a funny guy. It's not that simple. It's about developing, how do you use content? How do you tell the story over a 10-second intro?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where the art and science meet. And so starting in those small markets, don't listen to how they sound. Listen to their content. That is what drives the internet. That's what drives Facebook. That's what drives everything today, is content.
Would you agree that the easier somebody in broadcasting makes it sound in radio, the harder it is? And a lot of times you're thinking, well, that's all that guy has to do. I could do that. Yeah.
I think you forget, or people don't realize, or they forget all that went into being able to tell a story in 10 seconds. Word economy becomes really important. And I think that's one thing radio people have. They have for people that wax on and on, radio people just have no patience for that, because we've been taught over and over and over how to best use word economy to get to the point, to tell a good story. And really, content and story to me are kind of the same thing. One lives within the other. And so, I think people just forget it took those 10,000 hours to get to that point, to make it sound effortless,
Exactly. Do you think that radio, as we knew it, might have a resurgence of some sort, even with the new mediums?
I think so. I think actually the internet is the place to do that. Internet radio stations are becoming more and more popular all the time. And, when stations are picking music, I know everybody thinks the music director sits down and, they pick out their favorites and they've got this intuitive sense of what's going to be a hit. That's not how it works. It's done by research. And if they research 100 people, they find out the song that the majority of those people like the most and dislike the less, and they recognize it. Those are the three factors that go into it: that you know the song, that you like it and that you don't dislike it. Now, those sound like they're the same, but they're not. And so they take that, and maybe out of that 100 songs for those 100 people, they find 20 songs, and they know people like those songs. Those are the ones they play. Now, are there other songs they like? Yeah, but the majority of people don't like them. And so, but when you have the internet, now you're broadcasting to a whole world. And I do imaging for a few internet radio stations.
Define imaging.
So imaging is that produced voice that is between the records. And so I actually voice and produce for some stations. And
give us an example of something you might say for one of your clients.
Today's best country, frontier country, is one of them. Something like that. And then you would put music beds, sound effects, maybe some callers in there, to bring it alive. But it's to help create an image for the station. But anyway, these stations will send me their numbers. And it's interesting. They have listeners from the Philippines to, the United States, and they can break down where in the United States, to, interestingly enough, everything that's going on right now out east. Ukraine and Russia listenership has dropped off. Not a big surprise. But other countries actually went up. So, Belarus is actually doing really well, but not in the Ukraine.
And isn't it amazing that we have that data now in real time?
Yeah.
Especially with podcasting. Yeah. Now, I want to get back to what you said about content and about being a personality. And it seems like you've applied your discipline in radio to podcasting.
I think so. I think that's one thing that radio people, I think, do really well is they drive content. They tell stories, they drive content, they know the formatting, and they understand the clock. The clock is your friend, but it's your enemy at the same time.
Right.
And whether you're on TV or radio, you live by the clock. And so knowing that the first question you ask on a podcast has to be the most important question. It's what everybody wants to know. So don't make them wait for it. Just go ahead and ask it right off the bat. And don't talk about things that are superfluous. So when I'm going to have Sonny on there, it is a promise that we're going to talk about animation, and we're going to talk about his motivational speaking, and we're going to talk about radio. If I start talking about furniture, I've broken my promise to you. So stick to the topic. Don't try to be funny and cutesy, talk about this or that. Just talk about the topic, and people will appreciate that. You honor their time when you do that.
Now, there are some podcasters who, they're on for hours. One episode. Is that who you're talking to as far as, the content and the attention span of the listener?
When USA Today came out back in I think the late 80s, early 90s, everybody was like, well, newspapers are done with, because look at this. It's a dummies newspaper. They've crammed everything down into 2 or 3 paragraphs, and content is dead, and so on and so forth. But what they tapped into is that we're busier than ever. We have very little time. And so respecting people's time and keeping the subjects on track and doing it in 30 minutes or less, people will appreciate it. And the 30 minutes or less is because that's about the average commute. And most people listen to podcasts in their car.
You're right. And now they can do that, with Bluetooth and everything else.
Yeah,
so
that's kind of the tactical side of podcasting. Yeah, you have to have good content, but you have to understand, I'm going to do these 3 things. I'm going to start at the very top of the most important thing, and they'll stick around for the rest of it. I'm going to keep this short, and I'm going to stay on task, and you will keep listeners.
Good advice. All right, let's talk about your voiceover career, because at one point in your radio career, your voiceover business got so big that you actually had to leave, right?
Yeah, my wife and I always talked about it, and she's a much gutsier person than I am. She's, she's always like, "You can quit anytime you want. You're doing well." I'm like, "Well, when I start losing money from going to the radio station, that's when I'll quit." Well, we got to that point, and I'm kind of a chicken about this stuff. She's a lot braver than I am, and I had pulled that up at the last moment, like 2 or 3 times. Well, the last time, she's going, "I can't believe you. This is the 3rd time that you've done this." And I go, "Well, I just found out that if I stick around a couple more months, I get a bonus." She goes, "Oh, well, stick around." And so the week after my vacation, after I got in the bonus, I came in and gave my notice.
What does it take to break into the voiceover industry?
I get that a lot. That's a very big question. I'll tell you what I always tell people. If you want to break into voiceover, I suggest you read out loud for 30 to 60 minutes every day. Try that out. And not to yourself, stand up and read for 30 to 60 minutes. See if you like it. If you don't like that part, then move on. Second, I would get a book, read up about it. Do your internet searches and study it. Join maybe a couple of groups and just kind of lurk in the background and listen and see the conversations. I've had people call me and go, "What can you tell me about voiceover?" I'm like, "Well, I can tell you a lot." But go in with at least some knowledge if you want to talk to somebody. So I would start with that. I would talk, read out loud, get a book, maybe do some research on a voiceover coach. You don't need to buy any equipment. Everybody wants to buy a microphone right off the bat. You don't need that. You can do it over Zoom. You can do it over any other type of system. Clean Feed, Source Connect now, they're all out there. And so try that first and then see if you like it. And then you can start investing money because it gets expensive. My stuff is insured for over $25,000,
We're talking right now. Both of us are in our studios and you've got your booth. This is where you do your voiceover work. Kind of describe it to us. What equipment do you have in there?
So I have 2 of everything. I have, like, for example, I have a laptop and I have a desktop. I can work off of either one of those. I have what they call an IO, which is your input outputs for your computer. And I've got one that I use I call it my travel bag. So I've got 2 of those as backup. I don't buy one hard drive. I buy 4. So redundancy is really important. I have a really nice $2,000 mic pre, and then I've got a backup, which is $400 mic pre. I don't have one mic. I have 2, and they are exactly the same. So I have that redundancy at all times. As far as in the room, I have a little bit of foam on the wall, but not much. Foam doesn't really do that much. I actually built my own sound baffles, which are 3 inches thick of OC703 insulation. And so they're used for in houses to treat walls and stuff for sound. And I've built 12 of them. So I've got them hanging from the ceiling. I've got them all along the walls. And as you can tell, it's very quiet in here. You don't hear any noise.
And are you in a specific room or is it maybe a closet that was converted to your booth? How do you keep noise from the outside, say like lawnmowers and dogs barking, from creeping in?
Well, it's funny. I picked the absolute worst room in the house to make my studio. It's on the front by the street. You should, if you can, you should pick the back of the house on the bottom floor or the basement. But I didn't have that option. So I put it here in the front room. And then It's interesting the things that you find out. So, for instance, weather stripping all of your windows and your doors, because that's the first place sound leaks in. So, just putting a draft catcher underneath your door, and then putting the really good rubber insulation on the inside of the door, that will keep a lot of sound out. Get rid of your hollow core doors and put a solid door in. That also will make a big difference. But weather stripping the windows. And then I, on top of it, have sound curtains that I hang over the windows, as you can see there, black sound curtain. I'm showing it to Sonny here.
See that?
And then I actually have a booth that I built beside my desk. I have a very large desk. It's like 6 feet. I've got a booth in there.
So you have actually a sound booth where you go in, you've got a microphone in there. Yep. The computer's out here. You're able to go in there and record. So it's actually a booth within a booth almost, or a booth within a studio.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's not really a fully enclosed booth. It just has partitions, and they're built out so that they are, very thick and have lots of insulation on them, and sound doesn't get in and out easily.
Okay. We've got the equipment. Now let's talk about the jobs. You do a lot of imaging for radio stations and TV stations, but what about voiceovers and commercials?
So there's 3 categories. There is a union person, there is non-union. I'm a non-union. And then there's where you're in the union, but you don't get the union benefits. And I'm trying to remember the name for that right offhand.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about. Taft-Hartley?
No, Taft-Hartley is what you do. I Taft-Hartley, because I've done enough union jobs. I'm what they call a must join. If you do a union job and you're non-union, you can get away with it for it's a certain amount of time, like 3 to 6 months. And your agent is trying to get you as much work as they can during that time period. And so I Taft-Hartley'd during that period. And now in my next union job, I'll have to actually join the union. And it's hefty. It's a hefty fee but it's usually worth it too.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're getting residuals.
Yes.
As opposed to just getting paid once. Do you think the non-union component with all these websites that have popped up, voices.com, etc., do you think that they have either helped or hurt the voiceover industry?
That's a long debate. I kind of look at it more like they're here. This is the reality that we're going to deal with. It's not going to go away. And so we have to live with it in some aspect or the other. It's picking and choosing who you want to do business with and whom you don't want to do business with. And so most of them are called pay-to-play sites. They like to refer to themselves as marketplaces on the internet. But they're pay-to-plays. You pay a certain fee yearly, and sometimes they will take an additional fee after you've booked a job. And then they will send you auditions, and you can choose to do those auditions. Some of them you bid on, some of them you don't bid on. Sometimes they give you a range. They're all a little bit different. Mm-hmm.
What is the most unusual voiceover job you've been asked to do?
That's a really good question. I've had some really interesting things. I had to play a fish one time, and it was for a bank spot. They asked me to, be a fish in a bowl, and they go, just play it straight. Just play it like a straight fish. And I'm like, play it like a straight fish. What does that mean? And they go, we'll do all the sound effects later on. I'm like, oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So
you didn't have to sound like you think a fish would sound, whereas they wanted it to be a person's voice. Mm-hmm. And you hear that a lot in a lot of different commercials.
Yeah, sure. Whether it's a dog or or a bird, you would know about that. They wanted to have a personality like a person. So trying to think of some other things. Oh, I did there was an awards ceremony in Great Britain, and I did all the hallway announcements in a British voice, and I was hired by a German company. And I'd said, "No, I'm not British." And I go, "I can do a British characterization. I don't know if it's dead on British." And they're like, "Nah, we don't really know the difference."
Oh, that's funny. Do you think that you could do this forever, or is there a point where you think you might want to stop doing this?
I think you can do it a very long time. I think what happens is that sounds change. Right now, the millennial sound is big. I don't sound like a millennial at all. And so maybe I move into different categories. I do less commercials now, but I do a lot more corporate work. And I do a lot of industrial work, things like this. And so I think you can continue with that with your career as you age. You just will end up doing different types of projects. A lot of people my age will do narrate books, and I think there's a lot of money in that over time. It's kind of you kind of play the long game with that a lot of times, because you get like a stipend to read the book, and then you get profit sharing. So you get a check every month over time. And it's not a lot, but it adds up over 10 years, 20 years. And if you've got 50 books underneath your belt and you're getting, $100, $150 a month from each of them, it starts to pay pretty good.
Sure. Have you done any books?
I did one book, and I kind of enjoyed the process, although the author's grammar was really atrocious, and there was a lot of mistakes. And he would send me notes on chapters and go, "Yeah, I noticed you had to revoice that part. Thanks for taking care of that. I like how you did that."
So you had two roles.
So I was playing editor on the side.
All right, Steve, I have one last question. If you could speak to Steve O'Brien, the kid that was going to radio and TV stations with your dad, in awe, looking at all the equipment, and you could talk to him, what would you say?
I would say get into voiceover earlier, because the heyday of voiceover was really before the internet, when it all took off. That's when it was kind of a private club. And there was a dozen people in town that did it and were making really good money at it. The problem with technology and the internet is that now everybody can do it, and everybody is doing it. Mm-hmm. I saw a stat recently that the average voice talent, I think it was like 55% of people that have been doing this for less than 5 years consider themselves a professional. And that same percentage was making an average of like 5,000 to 7,000 a year. That's a hobby. That's not really a career.
It is.
Yeah.
I read a stat where it said that the average podcast lasts for 4 episodes.
Yeah.
Because that also is a job, as you well know.
Yeah. It's work. It's not just booking guests. It's not just doing the interviews. It's all the promotion that goes along with it. But I would say, again, take more risks as a young man. Take as many risks as you can. When you're young, you're pliable, you can bounce back and take a lot more risks. I think that is one thing that holds us back, and that we're so afraid. And you know what? Failure's good. There's a good aspect to it, and don't be afraid to fail.
Great advice. Steve, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that we were able to connect, thanks to our good friend. It was actually a conference here in San Antonio, and Lou Diamond was one of the speakers, and he said, "You have got to connect with Steve O'Brien." And we did. And so here we are. Everything happens for a reason, don't you think?
I think so. I think that success begets success. And when you meet remarkable people like yourself, like Lou Diamond, that they make an impression on you. And, I think everybody is a bit of a mentor out there to a certain degree. They say that as you get to a certain age, that it's almost a biological need to share your information. And I think that's true. And you're one of those people who shares it and is great and is glad to do it.
Amen. Steve, thank you so much, and look forward to further conversations.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, that's my visit with Steve O'Brien. You'll find links to Steve's website, his Facebook page, podcast, and more by visiting sonnyradio.com/show. That's sonnyradio.com/show. Until next time, I'm Sonny Melendrez, and I leave you with this thought from the late Maya Angelou, who said, "Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with deeper meaning." Bye-bye.